casting your slabs, you have the option too of taking advantage of the fact that chocolate takes on the texture of whatever it dries against. We did this last slab on parchment. That's a perfectly acceptable way of doing it if you don't really care about the surface texture, because you're going to change it in some way later, or it's just going to be some structural element of your piece that doesn't really isn't really obvious. It's just holding something else up. But very often you're actually going to want to make the piece, say, shiny or give it some other texture, and you can do that by choosing the texture of whatever you're spreading it out on. Just like your pieces of molded chocolate came out shiny because they were inside that shiny plastic cavity, if you spread it out on something shiny, when it dries, and if you do it properly, it will capture the shine of whatever it's been spread out on. So we very often make use of these plastic sheets. We have several of these flat white boxes that I'll introduce you to in the kitchen, and they're full of these sort of basic plastic sheets that have a nice sheen to them. They're not super glossy, but they have this kind of satin sheen to them that's quite attractive in chocolate when it translates into chocolate. We're not going to be able, though, as we mentioned with the parchment, we're not going to be able to peel this plastic away to prevent the curl. We have to use different strategies. The chocolate is going to have to completely dry in contact with the plastic in order to be able to capture that shine. The plastic itself, if you just take the piece of plastic and lay it down on a surface, it has this kind of natural undulation. It doesn't lie down perfectly flat all by itself. It has this kind of natural waviness to it, and chances are you're not going to want that in your piece. The parchment lies down fairly flat, but if you look at the surface of the plastic as it's lying here on this board, it's got this kind of waviness to it. If we want to get rid of that, there's an easy way to do it. It'll take a little bit of explaining. I'm going to walk over here and let the camera follow me. We're going over to the sink because we're actually going to use water to do the work of holding the plastic down flat. We have a dozen or so of these plain plastic boards that we use specifically for this purpose here in the one of the rolling racks of the kitchen. I take one of these boards, go over to the sink, grab a handful of water from the tap, and throw it onto the board and roughly spread it around. Take my sheet of plastic and put it on top of the wet board, and then I grab another handful of water and spread it on top of that plastic sheet. And I take a squeegee, and I have this squeegee and several others that I'll introduce you to later too, so there are 3 or 4 that we have to work with. And I'm going to squeegee this so that this plastic sheet is basically plastered down to the plastic board and held there by a very, very thin layer of water. And it's the surface tension of that water that keeps the two together. For the squeegeeing down of the sheet, I do it in this pattern. I always start from the center, and first I go towards the 4 corners, applying a fair amount of pressure. So start from the center, go to each of the corners, and then I start from the center and go to each of the 4 edges. Now basically the pressure from the squeegee squeezes out all but the very, very thinnest layer of water between the 2 boards and cleans most of the water off of the top surface. But I still have to finish drying that before I actually get to spreading chocolate. I have to finish drying that off with a side towel. I take a clean side towel and very, very thoroughly dry off all the water from the top of my sheet of plastic. And now I have my my sheet of plastic basically welded to the board and held there by the surface tension of the water. I could easily peel it away if I wanted to, but until I do that, it's basically pinned down and held perfectly flat against the board by that very, very thin layer of water. This particular sheet of plastic I used has a slightly bent edge, so that edge is hanging a little bit loose, but that won't be a problem for what we're about to use it for. So I'm going to clean off the water from the bottom of the board too, just so I don't end up accidentally getting water in my chocolate somewhere down the road. And now I have a very smooth, flat, shiny surface that I can work with and transfer that shine, that sappy sheen to my piece of chocolate.